Welcome everyone to the Intelligence Spotlight series. Today on the Intelligence Spotlight, we're welcoming Sohan DSouza. He's a visiting researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Center for Humans and Machines, where he examines influence operations, platform manipulation, misinformation, and AI ethics through an OSINT lens. Before this, he worked at MIT Media Lab as a research assistant in scalable cooperation, and also served as a research engineer at Mazda Institute, diving into automotive systems and social computing. With degrees spanning MIT, the British University in Dubai, SB Jain, and Illinois Technologies, his work blends computation, social science, and ethical inquiry. Notably, he co-authored the paper The Moral Machine Experiment, published in Nature, and has explored how people allocate blame to human drivers versus automated systems. He's with us today to help unpack the fraught nexus of technology and truth, intelligence, and influence. Sohan, welcome to the Intelligence Spotlight.
Thank you for having me.
Sohan, we usually have questions for our audience, for our guests usually, which our audience finds it interesting, and it's never predictable. And sometimes it could be a very funny thing, and sometimes it could be a very boring thing. But my question to you is, when was that time, maybe the first time you remember that you tried to do something in professional work? Maybe you published a paper, maybe you have researched something, and then you presented the results and somebody actually laughed at you.
Well, this would be the conference on digital experimentation 2016. Although that was intentional because I did deliberately crack a joke, so I don't know if that counts as people laughing at me. I used to do stand up actually for a while back in my Dubai days. I do like to throw in a bunch of jokes and humor and stuff like that when I'm presenting on anything.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's quite a good combo, I would say. So let's jump into the discussion for today, which I find it quite interesting, especially given your background and ethics and AI and machine learning. And, I sometimes feel like the term information warfare, which is usually used a lot recently, gets thrown around as well so much that it's so hard to pin down what it actually means today. One person uses it for state propaganda, and another for TikTok disinformation, or another for troll farms, right?
Right,
I
yeah.
think I think the definition has shifted over time, obviously. And so I want to start by asking you, how do you define it? How do you define information warfare today? And what does success look like for its practitioners?
So the information warfare broadly can mean anything from a covert online influence operation using fake accounts to, broadly speaking, something like JD Vance saying something about or catastrophizing about free speech in the UK or something like that. Like they could. These are all kinds of information warfare in a sense. The kind of information warfare that I typically deal with is the kind that involves coordinated inauthentic behavior and associated practices like micro-targeting and hacking to produce digital assets to churn into the inauthentic digital asset market and things like that. And how do we detect that sort of thing? And that's the defense side of the information warfare that I deal with. So practitioners, and I guess that there's a practitioners of the offensive side of this operation, right? The people, the disinformers themselves. The objectives may vary. I mean, sometimes it's to actually specifically push a narrative and get it seeded, if not actually fully becoming part of the mainstream narrative, then at least sowing enough uncertainty that it becomes very hard for the truth to actually get out and take root as a matter of certainty or relative certainty. Oftentimes it can be just sowing uncertainty. It can be fear, uncertainty, doubt kind of thing. What happens there? Polarization as well, like getting people to think that the other side is doing disinformation, is more gullible, and that those kinds of things, like adding so much complexity to issues that and fears of cover-ups, that it drives people towards towards leadership who claim to have simple and convenient solutions, reduce your brain overhead that way. Sanitizing and also sanitizing, whitewashing, greenwashing, that sort of thing as well. From our
Mm-hmm.
side, from the defense side, what we aim for primarily is getting a full handle on the scope of the information warfare attack, early exposure, while also making sure that it's not so early as to cause us to lose like leads and things like that. Earlier, ideally also identification of origin, although that's becoming harder because many of the attackers have found ways to, like in the case of the one I investigated last year, to hire out a content farm somewhere in a
Mm,
place where it's very hard to like legally compel exposure of the end client. And what we hope for is also, and what we're working towards is improving platform countermeasures, which is a
mm-hmm.
bit again harder nowadays with the capture of the especially America, where like many of these platforms
Right.
are based by anti-transparency forces,
Mm,
and ideally also like to be able to educate people about how what they can do at their level, and maybe even hopefully even have platforms notify them like if they're affected by these influence operations.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite interesting because today's warfare mainly is also the information warfare, and a lot of people are illiterate. So I guess there's huge need for media literacy as well. And I've been joking with friends recently, that friends in the same field, saying that I think we've passed on from media literacy stage because people still are not literate in media and how to consume information, while we now have to teach people about AI
Mhm.
literacy, which is
Yeah.
another huge thing, and understanding AI generated content, LLMs, and all of that. And I've been also following how fake personas online look so much more convincing now. And some of them also even post like normal people, right? Share cat pictures, complain about traffic, and the kind of thing. And yet somewhere there is usually a slip up. I guess I'm curious to know what those slips still are in 2025. Many states and non-state actors use these synthetic personas as well in LLM generated narratives, right? And also automated seeding. So what signals still give coordinated inauthentic behavior away in 2025, given your experience in this field?
Yeah, it is true that use of generative AI is making it in many cases harder to figure out what might be inauthentic content. Like you can use AI to just like slightly vary content so that you can't use similarity measures as easily, like look for duplicates. But there's still other ways, things like there'll be bursts of activity that are synchronized, like at the tactical level. And a related thing, there's like time zones that activity clustered in certain time zones, which is and sometimes even activity that's clustered in time zones that's not concordant with the time zone of the target audience or the audience or the people who claim to be um, you know having these conversations. Say, there are accounts that claim to be in India, but they'll be mainly active in a different time zone, like in the where it's daytime in North America, for example, or vice versa. There could also be something specific to AI, like repeated hallucinations, like the
Mm-mm.
multiple actors repeating the same hallucination because they're using the same underlying engine, as well as just when these AI frameworks, when they're hoovering up information from across the internet, they'll pick up some errors in phrasing or framing, and they'll repeat those errors, just like blindly repeat those errors. So those can also be used to identify like possible use of specifically use of LLMs, but also just coordinated authentic
Right.
behavior, inorganic network structures,
Mhm.
the use of boilerplate templates. So they might create like 1,000 Facebook pages, excuse me, that I used to say boost some content.
Yeah.
But all of those pages will just have like a different AI generated content within the same
Mm,
general structure. So it'll be like there was one where we saw a lot of Vietnamese origin pages that were boosting some content, And all of those pages had like the same outline, like there'd be some Vietnamese proverb or a single like phrase, right, only a single post. So that gave it away.
Right.
Yeah, things like that. Shared infrastructure, shared monetization, common assets, common ads, and things like that as well. Which
Mm,
is why platform transparency and access to data for investigation and research is so important.
yeah. So do you think there is this pattern that actually gives away these signals when you look at these sort of mass content creation and LLM produced reports, particularly when it comes to places like, yeah, it's produced in one place, it's given the idea of that it is like, I want to give the example of the riots in the UK, right? The reason behind it was an article, and that article was disseminated within the UK, while the origin of that article, the person behind it was way far from the actual location, right?
Mhm.
So do you see there's this common pattern that could be identified?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that wasn't the only one actually.
Yeah.
There was one account that was pretty active. That was one of the first accounts to claim that it was a migrant who was behind the attack, and that account, Muslim migrant that was behind the attack, and that account was turns out to have been associated and probably run by a Turkish couple living in Dubai. There was another account which was active early on in boosting this content and adding like hashtags and things like that to
Mm,
make it go around faster. And that turns out to have been an Indian account, an Indian run account, posing as a news organization. And then there was the organization that you mentioned, like this Potemkin news outlet that that poses as a legitimate journalism.
mm, mm,
Yeah, so you can use like I used OSINT in all three cases, which is like looking under the hood and seeing, okay, what is the past trail
yeah.
of these accounts, like where are they, what are their previous handles, what are their
Mm,
previous content, what kind of content have been posting previously, have they been scrubbed, have they been rehandled and things like that.
yeah, yeah. So it's interesting how now it goes deeper into the main part of our discussion is like you do these OSINT reports, you expose these networks, you find out these accounts, but of course it's done through a methodology, right? And especially when I try out new tools myself, I notice they're like great for heavy lifting, like scrapping or sorting out like a lot of data at once.
Mhm.
Then I hit a point where I just don't trust automation anymore. You do have these automated tools that can help out a lot, and you don't have to do it manually. And I feel like human mind has to step in that stage because I want to know from your perspective that how OSINT stack that actually benefits from machine learning, which steps are safer for automation, for example, and which remains still needs to be led by human beings and human based judgment and the chain of custody that it has.
Yeah, I think automation is good for things like providing initial leads, things like candidate anomaly detection, things like similarity clustering.
Mhm.
Sometimes media will spread and it'll be slightly mutated each time. Each attempted booster or grifter will sometimes, add their watermark or something to something to try and,
Uh-huh.
get their own brand going on that. Things like detecting, the similarity of that kind of media. Okay, it's basically the same picture that's going around, the same, disinformation image or video that's going around, but there are just these slight differences in the watermark or something like that. So things like similarity clustering, community detection, like if you have, a network, there are some analysis you can just scripts that you can run, but also sometimes AI can help detect communities, anomalous network features much faster. And also sometimes assisting with scraping, that sort of thing as well, like at scale, if you want to do
Yeah.
something across different platforms or
Mhm.
things like that, or across different accounts or something like that, that can help. As far as for the human side, you still need humans in supervisory role. I've
Yeah.
seen the outputs of some AI tools, and it's kind of a mixed bag. Like some things are dead on,
Yeah.
and some things are, it got misled by similarities in names and all that without knowing that this is part of a general, like a meme in that community or something like that.
Hmm.
So yeah, humans need to do things like you know preempting machines being misled by burglarization, by speak, and
Right.
memes and things like that, context assessment, sourcing and archiving, running
Hmm.
robustness checks. Yeah, you still need humans to do that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I've also seen like there's a sharp rise in a lot of OSINTers. You might have also noticed not all of them are genuine people, but also mimicking OSINTers.
Yeah.
Yeah, to somehow discredit them, but at the same time, I think this is an ethical issue as well because I've seen like drafts written completely by LLMs, right? And at
Mhm.
first glance, they look very sharp, very with a hook title, very analytical, like description of the methodology. Especially when you read closely, there are always these little things that are off when you read them, especially if you're experiencing how these things work, like misuse sources, for instance, or too much certainty in places where a human analyst would be very cautious about, right? So I was wondering, LLMs can draft these convincing reports and OSINT reports, particularly, which are sensitive in a way. What are the failure modes you see most often in analytical writings, and how do you detect them quickly?
Yeah, sometimes this might happen with um s like the engine might take something that has like a range of certainty or something like that, um and just misinterpret that as, well, this is, it's like between 25 and 50%. It'll just take the 50% and pile those on and think and come to a conclusion that it might be more certain than it really is. You can hallucinate sources based on similarity, or sometimes when something is not even known, it could try and do something like similarity metrics,
Hmm.
similarity measures to assume a source when
Right.
that's not the actual source. And yeah, sometimes it could be, well, there's also, yeah, the lack of evidentiary sufficient, like sufficient evidence in general. Like it's looking more to, it's looking more to make something that fits together rather than something that um than looking at individual pieces and look, like we know this is a high degree of certainty, this is not, and instead of trying to fit those together, it could just look at those separately, but it often doesn't.
Yeah. So I think the very good example in this case is Grok. In
Mhm,
Twitter, we had this a large group of people, crowd that were against AI in any way or form, right? Or that they were
mhm,
questioning it. But then they got into this trap of if there was a post, of course, the feature is like, Grok, is this true? For instance, that's the prompt,
mhm.
and people would
Yeah,
reply in that post. And Grok automatically would analyze it. Of course, the data it was using it was based on the previous tweets or posts on its platform,
mhm,
but that's also questionable because you have a lot of biases in that space too. You have a lot of opinions that are portrayed as facts. And in a lot of cases, this good example of a picture of this Palestinian girl that Grok said, no, it's actually from Syria, like from 2012, things like that. It analyzed it. And a lot of
yeah,
people did believe it. And it actually, in a negative way, things like that impact human judgments too, because a lot of people no longer they question. They don't question the authenticity of a post, for example. They simply rely on, like, let's say Google, like Grok, is this true? Or perhaps I'm not sure like how the future would look like. So I think we can get into that stage as well. And the authenticity is a question I always think about. And sometimes, like, imagine grading an AI written report the same way you would grade a student essay. They're completely different. But instead of grammar and structure, it's more like, did you check the source, for example? AI would also give you a lot of good source, right?
yeah.
but also if you're a student, especially when we were students, we didn't have the the leverage of AI, so we had to do everything, every tiny bit of structuring by ourselves, and we would always find it very hard how to, like, in terms of balancing it. So I was thinking, if you had to score an LLM OSINT report or any type of report that is analytical, what metrics would you use as a professor, as someone like just grading a student's essay? Like, think collaboration would be one metric, source transparency, reproducibility, like would this report be reproduced in the same way again and again, or adversarial robustness in it?
Yeah, I'd say that, yeah, transparency is very important. Things like, um, does everything link to a source, and specifically, like, have you captured like archives of things? And you can't just like say this, that this source said it whenever and then it's gone now. And yeah, I guess in terms of reproducibility, like everyone, I suppose everyone has their own perspectives and their own intuitions as to what's important and what stands out. So it's unlikely that two investigators looking at even the same data will necessarily come up with the exact same things, but at least they should be able to do like peer review on each other's conclusions, score the confidence in like a given conclusion, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something like, you take like the different conclusions in a report, the different claims in a report, and have them individually peer reviewed by different other analysts or something like that, and that could give some um, focused level of confidence in each claim.
Right.
Yeah, and of course, things like being wary of things like attempts to mislead investigators. We're seeing more of that nowadays. Operation Matrushka, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is a famous attempt to do so. They could do something like, create websites that look like they're part of the operation, but then they have in the sitemap pages that name some author or something like that, and it looks like it's hidden in the sitemap. So an investigator might have confidence in that, but then that was deliberately planted to mislead them. So that sort of thing can
Right.
happen as well. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, not just like leaping to conclusions based on like too few data points, looking at the broader picture and seeing like does it, all of this fit together in a coherent direction.
I'm sure a lot of professors, teachers, or people just reviewing these papers would find it useful now. If we were to play a scenario for you, because when I think about OSINT, it has
Mhm.
its own weak points as well, and throughout the process, it's always not the obvious stuff, and that's why we sometimes need the peer review in our reports too, if we are working collaboratively. And that's why collaboration is promoted a lot in this field, to work collaboratively or to investigate collaboratively, because to somehow cover those weak spots. It could be like a very subtle pressure, like harassment that might distract you, or that the data that looks fine until you realize it's actually poisoned. So I wonder, in a scenario, you can, yeah, give a very fictional scenario, of course, but if you had to run a red team against your own OSINT process, where would you attack it exactly?
Yeah, there are a bunch of vulnerabilities which I myself try and preempt, and watch out for wherever possible.
Mm,
Some could be, like I mentioned, like deliberately faked, very very superficially compelling leads, and they don't really fit with everything else that's more organic.
mm-hmm.
So it might be like a false flag, an attempt at a false flag. So yeah, poisoning the data with that kind of thing. And as I mentioned, like these, which is also related, like false flag, like those Matryoshka style
Mm-hmm.
operations, which are like you get hit with claims that people are saying this, like these are tweets that were seen allegedly in the wild, or this is an image that was seen of taken by someone, and it shows some graffiti, like this is a popular one in the Matryoshka operation. It's like there's some graffiti on the wall that's showing something, and would you please verify this? And you first need to verify that that actually, did show up in that place and wasn't just planted there like digitally.
Yeah.
Another one is also watching out for like ephemeral assets. Like you can simulate something like that where you can investigate something and then the asset that you're looking at disappears or gets rehandled or things like that, and you haven't captured those. So you want to make sure that you maintain discipline in capturing the appearance of each of these assets at each stage and that they existed to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting thing to note. Everyone who's listening, I think they should repeat this section and listen carefully, because we do need to be sure 100% and verify everything before we move forward into our reports. And I think it's also worth noting that every year development in AI speeds up in a way that it's lightning speed, I would say, compared to like before the pandemic. That's a very good timeline, I would say. And since 2021, now it's 2025, so 5 years within our decade. I think in this moment, everyone is somehow rushing to use AI investigation, and I'm sure you might have noticed that. But we don't always have those shared rules of the road and how to use it in a way that is shared and it's ethical and it's basically somehow global in the investigation side, or let's say regional at least. But I've also seen some places they're just experimenting it to see how it works, how it's not, but others are more cautious about it. And it feels like we need at least a basic norm, at least to ground this work. So what norm should investigative journalists and OSINT units adopt this year? We're in August, almost end of August, in September 2025. And of course, it's almost this year is done. And think of 2026 when using AI. What should be the norm after this?
Yeah, I think the most important one would be to make sure that you have a window into what exactly is happening at each stage of investigation using AI. Like, don't let things like sources and the evolution of the target, like the target asset, get lost in the AI assessment of
Mhm.
it.
Right.
So things like, and especially nowadays, given that we've seen examples of transparency being foiled by things like takedown requests
Mm.
being made to like third-party archives. So yeah, a kind of robust native archiving wherever possible. Things like media data signatures.
Mhm.
Make sure that canonical IDs are collected. We see a lot of rehandling and renaming, and also running archives off the transparency data itself. Make sure that the AI, whatever setup that you have, is always like able to answer your questions about, okay, so for this conclusion, what data did you use to reach that conclusion at this stage, and how would it look different if you had used this data instead, for example?
Yeah. Um, so I guess now we also have to think of some case studies, because when I read a case study, and it just flips how I see things, because I understood the limits of a tool, for example, and then someone suddenly shows me a new angle into it. It was probably maybe very basic for me, or I understood it in a very straightforward way, but then I see it's being used in different way, in a different angle that I've never thought of it. And I'm curious if you had a moment like that recently, maybe one recent case study that changed your mind about an AI capability in open source investigations and research.
Yeah, so I've done some workshops and sessions and even testing sessions with the Vera AI. Are you familiar with them?
Not really. If you can explain more.
Yeah, it's well, these sessions is various kind of an initiative to create tools to assist with open source intelligence investigations, including power tools. And this is like part of this whole thing with the European Broadcasting Union. It's kind of a general like initiative to improve the tool set available to OSINT document
Mhm.
practitioners. So one of their plugins, actually, it's like a browser plugin which does analysis of actually both text and media data. It's a pretty impressive assistant, at least.
Okay,
It still requires human oversight to a significant degree, but it's a great tool that that acts as a great force multiplier for
I
a
see.
competent OSINT practitioner.
Okay, and then name one data set which is very underrated. Archive you wish more people and investigators used.
Yeah, actually, just a few days ago, I saw another version, like an update on what to fix. So what to fix is an organization that, and I'm kind of part of their monetization discussion circle, and um, they've been collecting data on platform fa- like meta monetization for a long time, and are developing tools to be able to easily navigate it and search through it and stuff like that. So their monetization database is very, very expansive
Mm,
and growing a lot as well. So
right.
that's a very good database to use for investigations,
Hmm.
especially given that nowadays there's a lot of the economy, like the grifter economy is kind of overlapping with the true believer
Well,
communities on these various platforms. So monetization plays a big role in that, and can also be used to because of the financial trail and everything can be used to potentially locate like real world identities of these often
mm,
anonymous people. Yeah,
wow.
so that's like what to fix's monetization database is something to look into. That definitely look into for that.
What to fix database? Well, remember
Yeah,
that.
one word: what to fix,
That's it.
sometimes abbreviated as WTF.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice way to remember it as well. And I also actually noticed, and I've seen a lot that many of the best analysts we have, they aren't the most technical in this field. Just, I mean, really sharp at asking questions, thinking about critically thinking or reading people or piecing together
Mm.
different contexts. And I wanted to ask you, like, if you have one skill that new analysts could master that has nothing to do with code or any technical aspects.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much of a I think it's so much of a skill as sort of an art in a sense,
Hmm.
or at least something that is an intuition that's tuned by experience.
Yeah.
So from things like how the digital asset market works,
Hmm.
you have a whole economy of traders and resellers and sellers and buyers, and
Yeah.
a whole market in digital assets like accounts and pages and groups and stuff like that, which are either farmed or they're hacked, and then they're bundled up and sold on,
Hmm.
sometimes in hundreds or packages of hundreds and thousands, and sometimes used to run influence operations or scams or things like that. So just kind of understanding them, how this digital asset market works,
Uh-huh.
how these assets trade hands and then get scrubbed and rebranded and
Hmm.
repurposed for different often nefarious purposes. Yeah, I think that's something that is growing, definitely, especially on certain internet communities, like certain communities in like Southeast Asia, South Asia, and the Near East. So it would be good to familiarize yourself with this and understand how that works, so that you can preempt
Hmm.
some of the tactics used by this economy.
Right, right. Well, that's a very interesting way to see it as well. The whole discussion we started from information warfare. I think all of these aspects you mentioned, the tools you suggested, the skills that new analysts need to understand and see it from from different angle to it. I think we are reaching to our final question as well, and it's also back we're going. We started from information warfare, and then we zoomed in into various details of detection of how these things work with AI and LLMs. And now let's zoom out, and look ahead, because the next 5 years are very crucial for humankind generally in areas of AI, and a lot of people are fearing the AGI as well, and that AI is actually taking over everything. But it's very hard to predict the way how things unfold. So if we're to look in the next 5 years before we hit 2030, a new decade, how would the information warfare would look like from your perspective?
So there'll be things like more localization, there'll be tighter community targeting. That kind of capacity is afforded by advances in AI used by the perpetrators of these
Hmm.
attacks. So yeah, they'll be we definitely like improving their ability to target people, especially given now that the platforms are kind of getting more lax in enforcing in building countermeasures to these things.
Right, right.
Yeah, more of attempting to sow discord and confusion, especially in the counter-authoritarian communities.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, we've seen so far a lot of influence operations like Target mainly are pushing sort of right-wing disinformation, but we are also seeing a growing community of left-wing targeted
Mm,
misinformation. So yeah, some of that, but like more of that will happen as they try and split up
mhm.
possible opposition to authoritarians. There will be more, I think, more counter attacks to against investigators, against the researchers, and also more attacks to mislead, like more attempts to do things like what I mentioned before, false flag or um, made up misinformation,
Right, yeah.
misinformation about misinformation in a sense,
Mm-mm.
to waste investigators and researchers' time and poison their data.
Yeah.
And as far as what it looks like from our side to try and mitigate all of this, I think there'll be more efforts put towards content provenance, things like content authenticity. I think like the content authenticity initiative, um, more more tools, I think, for machine learning assists, like I mentioned before, agentic AI. Where I've already used like some of I've worked with Valent previously, and I've used some of the output of their AI tools, as well as like the early stages of an AI tool, uh, an AI assist tool by Satoris Sydney, for example. So yeah, we're looking at more tools like that coming out and making their way into practice.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I would say I hope for is more strategic policy design as well to facilitate all of
Mm,
this,
mm, mm.
because really the platforms can just shut down whatever little transparency they already have. Is much of it just legacy. So things like more and strategically constituted policy for better transparency, better access for investigators and researchers, and more government infrastructure for things like native archiving or maybe cloud-based solutions that can be used by investigators and by civilians as well.
Right. Well, I like on this final note, I like the term you used earlier, misinformation against disinformation. And I think on that note, thank you so much, Sohan, for being at
I
the
just want
intelligence.
to clarify. Sorry, I
Yes,
just want to clarify. I said misinformation about misinformation.
misinformation
Misinformation,
about misinformation, right?
yeah, to as
Wow.
an
Okay.
attempt to mislead
Okay.
investigators and mislead researchers and waste their time with
Yeah.
cases of misinformation, alleged cases of misinformation that don't actually exist. So
Right.
they go and try and locate the original source of it. But the whole like claim itself, the claim about the claim was made up to begin with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I like that the way you termed it was very unique in its own way. And I think it's reshaping the industry a lot, and how we need to be more cautious about Thank you so much, Sohan, for the very insightful discussion about AI, the future of AI and investigations in OSINT and LLMs. Everything was fascinating. Thanks for contributing, and I wish you the best.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.